The rain turned Willow Creek streets into mirrors. Lily's small hand gripped mine, years of solitude weighed heavy. Then she appeared, Emily, red dress soaked, umbrella collapsed. Collision. Heartbeats tangled. "What are you running from?" I whispered. Her eyes froze me. A spark ignited, a dangerous, unspoken pull neither of us could escape. If you like our emotional videos, then press the subscribe button and also press bell icon for notification of daily upload videos. Don't skip video, watch till end, thanks. The morning sun filtered through the bakery's foggy windows, casting warm streaks across the worn wooden floor. Outside, Willow Creek still glistened from yesterday's rain, the cobblestones reflecting fractured sunlight like shards of broken glass. I stepped inside hesitantly, unsure if I was ready to confront the man whose question had lodged itself in my mind the night before. Emily. He remembered my name. That alone was a shock. The world rarely bothered to remember me at all. Jack sat near the corner, a book lying forgotten on the table beside him, his hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. He looked up as I entered, and a smile, gentle and unassuming yet filled with weight, spread across his face. "Emily," he said, his voice carrying the warmth of familiarity, as though he had been waiting for me. My stomach fluttered unexpectedly. I had barely known him for an hour, yet there was something in the steady way he said my name that made the hair on my arms rise. I was hoping you might give me some advice," I stammered, sliding into the chair across from him. My heart raced. About whether I should stay here or go back to the city. I avoided his eyes, too aware of the intimate space between us. Jack didn't answer immediately. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing with a quiet intensity. "Advice," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "That's a dangerous thing. People forget that advice is only as good as the courage behind it." He paused, letting the words hang between us like smoke. The bakery smelled of fresh bread and rain-dampened air, an oddly comforting mix that somehow made my nerves both tense and calm. I don't know what to do," I admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "I feel trapped. Like if I leave, I'm abandoning my family, but if I stay, I'm wasting my life." The words felt heavy, spilling out faster than I could stop them. Jack leaned back, running a hand over his stubbled jaw, and exhaled slowly. "I know the feeling." His eyes, deep and dark, met mine, and for a moment, the entire room seemed to shrink until it was only us. "I lost someone once," he said quietly. "My wife. 10 years ago. I was left with a small daughter, a life that demanded everything, and the kind of loneliness that seeps into your bones. There were nights I wondered if I had the strength to keep going, nights I thought the world would be brighter without me." I flinched slightly, my fingers curling around the edge of the table. He didn't notice, or maybe he did, and didn't comment. There was a raw honesty in his voice, a vulnerability that made my chest ache. I realized then that this wasn't someone offering cliches or rehearsed wisdom. This was a man who had carried pain in full view, yet had survived it, and somehow, in surviving, found the quiet strength that now anchored him in the world. I don't know if I can do what you did," I said softly, almost to myself. "Facing it all alone." Jack's lips curved faintly, a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You don't have to do it alone," he said. "But the choices, the real choices, they have to come from inside. Not from fear, not from obligation, not from what other people think. Only from what you want your life to be when the world is quiet and no one is watching." There was a pause, filled only by the soft patter of rain still falling beyond the windows, a rhythmic heartbeat against the glass. I realized I was holding my breath. Jack's gaze was steady, unwavering, and there was a weight in it that made my chest tighten. The hours slipped by unnoticed. We talked of small things first, the weather, the bread, the townspeople, but gradually, the conversation wound its way into deeper territory. Stories of loss and hope, dreams deferred and regained, laughter that came not out of levity but relief. Every word felt like a spark catching dry wood. The tension between us was electric but subtle, a current running beneath polite gestures and shared smiles. I found myself leaning slightly closer without realizing it, drawn to the warmth and stability he radiated. Jack noticed. Of that, I was certain. The slight shift in his posture when I laughed too loudly, the way his eyes lingered on mine when I asked a question, the gentle, almost protective tilt of his body toward me. I didn't know if it was guidance, or something else entirely, something that was dangerous to acknowledge in a town where everyone noticed everything. Outside, the rain finally stopped, leaving streaks that shimmered under clearing sunlight. But inside, the bakery felt suspended, removed from the world, a small universe carved out of flour, coffee steam, and quiet glances. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt a sense of clarity. Not certainty, but a spark of understanding that some encounters changed the trajectory of a life in ways that were impossible to anticipate. By the time I stood to leave, my hands had cooled from the warmth of my mug, my hair damp from rain and lingering excitement. Jack rose as well, nodding politely, but there was something in his expression, a quiet acknowledgement of the weight that had passed between us. The townspeople outside had already begun to whisper. Someone had seen us together. Someone would surely question why a widowed man in his 40s was so invested in a young woman barely in her 20s. But none of that mattered. I felt the pull again, subtle and insistent, like a thread I couldn't ignore. Something had begun here, a connection that promised guidance, yes, but also danger. Something that might grow into affection, perhaps even desire. And while I wanted to run from it, I knew it would be impossible. Not because it was forbidden, but because it already felt inevitable. As I walked back down the cobblestone street, sunlight glinting off puddles, I could feel Jack's presence lingering behind me like a shadow, steady, unshakable. I didn't know where this path would lead. I didn't know if I wanted to. But I knew one thing, in a town that thrived on secrets and gossip, in a life where I had felt so small, I had just found something monumental. A moment. A spark. A question asked in the rain. And for the first time, I wondered if my heart might finally be ready to answer. The morning light crept hesitantly through the curtains of my small rented room, dust motes dancing in the golden haze. Outside, Willow Creek stirred with the familiar rhythm of life, shopkeepers unlocking doors, children darting along cobblestone streets, neighbors exchanging muted gossip. But inside, my heart felt restless, tangled in knots I could not unravel. I couldn't stop thinking about Jack, the warmth in his eyes, the ease of his presence, and the heavy gravity of the words he had spoken the day before. I found myself walking toward the bakery without realizing it, as if some invisible thread guided me there. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of bread and rain-dampened earth. Jack was already there, sitting by the corner window, a half-empty cup of coffee before him. Lily was perched nearby, humming softly while sketching little figures in her notebook. Jack glanced up as I approached, and something in his expression, an almost imperceptible tilt of the head, a softened gaze, made my chest ache. I don't know what to do, I confessed the moment I slid into the chair across from him. My fingers twisted the hem of my red dress nervously. I feel pulled in two directions. If I stay, I'm trapped by responsibility. If I leave, I feel guilty. And scared. My voice broke slightly, betraying the turmoil I tried to conceal. Jack leaned back, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Choices, he said softly, are heavier than people realize. Sometimes we chase dreams, and sometimes we run from ourselves. Both feel terrifying. Both demand sacrifice. His gaze softened, and I realized he wasn't talking from theory. He was talking from experience. I don't even know if I'm strong enough, I admitted. The words trembled in my throat, fragile as glass. Jack's hand rested lightly on mine across the table. It wasn't a gesture of romance, it wasn't that kind of touch, but it carried a quiet authority, a reassurance that made my pulse hitch. You are, he said simply. You just don't know it yet. Strength isn't always about doing everything alone. Sometimes it's knowing when to lean on someone, even if just for guidance. I looked down at his hand, the subtle warmth seeping through my skin. In that small, deliberate touch, I felt something unspoken, a bridge across the years between us, across our different lives. There was safety in it, yes, but also an ache I could not name. For hours, we spoke. Not just of my choices, but of life, of failure, of dreams deferred and quietly mourned. Jack told me about his wife, about nights he had held Lily while tears slipped silently down his cheeks, about the small victories that kept him going. There was no self-pity, no demand for sympathy, only raw honesty, and a lesson that pain, when faced, could shape strength instead of breaking it. I found myself laughing at stories I should have felt nothing at, caught up in the rhythm of his voice, in the cadence of his storytelling. There was something intoxicating in the way he spoke, not in the way of a lover, but of someone who had truly endured and emerged whole. And yet, beneath it all, there was tension, a subtle current that hummed between us. Every glance lingered just a moment too long, every shared laugh made my chest flutter. Lily occasionally looked up from her sketches, tilting her head in curiosity, sensing the unspoken gravity in our exchange. Her presence was grounding, yet it added another layer to the complexity I was beginning to feel. Jack's role as a father was evident in the careful way he watched her, the gentle corrections he offered, the quiet pride that shone through his eyes. I couldn't help but notice how naturally protective he was, toward her, and, by extension, toward me. As the rain picked up again outside, tapping against the window like a soft drumbeat, I realized the world beyond the bakery felt distant and irrelevant. Inside, the air was thick with warmth and tension. I wanted guidance, yes, but I also wanted to linger, to remain here in this space where my confusion and longing could exist without judgment. Jack spoke again, breaking the silence that had settled over us. "You're afraid," he said, "of making the wrong choice. But sometimes, there is no wrong choice. Only the courage to act, and the wisdom to live with the consequences." His words resonated in me, deeper than I expected. I felt a weight lift slightly, replaced by a quiet determination, but it was tinged with something more dangerous, something I wasn't ready to name. Time passed unnoticed. The clouds outside parted, revealing a timid sun that glimmered off wet rooftops. But inside, the bakery remained our small, suspended world, a place where reality softened, where judgment faded, and where two lives brushed against each other with quiet intensity. I couldn't decide if it was the warmth, the stories, or the subtle magnetism between us that made my heart pound, but I knew something profound had shifted. Jack glanced at me then, a flicker of something unspoken in his eyes. I felt it too, a connection that could become guidance, mentorship, or something far more dangerous. It was the kind of awareness that prickled at the back of my neck and made my palms sweat, even as I told myself to focus on clarity and decision-making. When it was time to leave, the bakery seemed impossibly quiet. The world beyond the door felt sharper, harsher, and infinitely more complicated. I walked past Jack, my hand brushing against his for a brief second. It was fleeting, yet the electricity lingered in my veins long after the touch ended. I dared not look back, yet I felt his gaze follow me out into the street, steady and unwavering. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds completely, bathing Willow Creek in golden light. But the warmth couldn't reach the chill of uncertainty that now hovered over me. Jack's words, his presence, and the unspoken tension between us had stirred something dangerous, thrilling, and terrifying all at once. I had come seeking advice, but what I found was a pull, toward wisdom, yes, but also toward a man who challenged the rules I had constructed around my heart. As I walked down the cobblestone streets, sunlight glinting off puddles, I realized I was not the same Emily who had entered the bakery that morning. Something had begun, a connection, fragile and electric, that promised guidance, and maybe, just maybe, something far deeper. Something I wasn't ready to confront. A spark had ignited in the rain-soaked corner of Willow Creek, one that neither of us could ignore, and I knew that life, as I had known it, would never be the same. The sun had barely risen over Willow Creek, yet the town seemed already alive with whispered judgments. I walked past the narrow streets, each cobblestone echoing beneath my boots like a muted drumbeat of scrutiny. I could feel it in the air, almost tangible, the collective gaze of neighbors, shopkeepers, and casual passers-by, all weighing, measuring, questioning. The world had shifted since that day in the bakery, and I was painfully aware of it. Jack had been quiet about it, of course. He never mentioned the whispers, the sideways glances, the speculative smiles of townspeople. But I could sense it, simmering beneath the surface of our interactions. I caught a baker winking with exaggerated interest, a group of women at the fountain tilting their heads conspiratorially, and a man crossing the street quickly, muttering something about Jack's odd friendship with a young woman. The town thrived on stories, and ours had begun to bloom. I ducked into the bakery, seeking refuge from the weight of their scrutiny. Jack was there, as always, seated by the corner window. His eyes met mine, steady, grounding me in a way that made the outside world fade. Lily waved, oblivious to the tension that hung like smoke between the walls of the small space. I smiled faintly, grateful for the anchor of familiarity. I saw them, I whispered, my fingers nervously curling around the edge of the table. The gossip, everyone's talking. Jack nodded slowly, a half-smile tugging at his lips. Let them talk, he said softly, his voice carrying that quiet authority that always managed to calm the storm inside me. This, what we share, isn't theirs to understand. It's ours to navigate. I studied him then, really looked at him. The slight stubble on his jaw, the gentle crease of concern between his brows, the calm strength in his posture, it was intoxicating. He was a man who had lived through pain, who had carried burdens that would have crushed someone else. And yet here he was, extending not just advice, but presence, reassurance, and, though I didn't dare name it, a subtle pull that tugged at my chest. Lily chirped from her seat, pointing at my sketchbook. You drew him too, she exclaimed. I glanced down and realized I had been doodling Jack absent-mindedly, capturing the quiet intensity of his eyes, the curve of his jaw, the gentle slope of his shoulders. Heat rose to my cheeks. Did he notice? Did anyone notice? I faltered, unsure whether to confess or hide my thoughts. I didn't mean to. Jack held up a hand, cutting me off gently. It's all right. It's natural to notice, to be drawn. His words lingered in the air like incense, subtle yet intoxicating. I wanted to shrink under their weight, yet part of me ached to lean closer, to let the dangerous tension stretch between us unabated. We spent the morning talking, the outside world shrinking with every shared laugh, every story, every careful glance. The bakery became our private realm, a space where judgment held no sway, where the quiet sparks of connection could thrive. But every time the door creaked, I felt the ghosts of the townspeople watching, whispering, measuring. Their scrutiny only made the moments with Jack more charged, more forbidden, more urgent. I realized then that this connection was no longer merely guidance. It was something alive, something that pulsed beneath the surface like an unspoken promise. Each conversation carried weight, each shared silence was electric. The air between us seemed to hum, and my chest ached with anticipation I could neither name nor ignore. Jack's hand brushed against mine briefly as he reached for a napkin, and I felt a jolt run through me. Not desire, at least, not fully, but something close, something terrifying in its subtle intensity. He looked at me then, and I knew he felt it too, though he did not acknowledge it. Lily, perched innocently at her table, hummed a tune, blissfully unaware of the tension threading through the room. Emily, Jack said softly, his voice dropping to a whisper that seemed meant only for me, sometimes strength isn't about defying the world. Sometimes it's about knowing when to stand firm, even when the world doubts you. I swallowed hard, nodding. The weight of the town's scrutiny pressed against my chest, yet his words acted like armor, a shield against the biting whispers outside. I wanted to tell him everything, to confide the trembling curiosity in my heart, the pull I felt whenever our hands brushed or our gazes met. But I stopped myself. Some things were too dangerous, too raw, too impossible to name. Hours passed unnoticed. The sun arced higher, and yet the world beyond the bakery seemed frozen. Outside, a group of neighbors leaned over a fence, whispering, glancing in our direction. I caught snippets, words like, odd, inappropriate, unusual, but they might as well have been echoes from another universe. Inside, there was only Jack, the warmth of his presence, and the quiet electricity threading through our shared space. I glanced at him, and for a moment, the years between us, the difference in experience, the unspoken societal boundaries, all of it blurred into insignificance. I wanted to lean forward, to let my pulse sync with his, to let the tension rise until it could no longer be contained. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I settled for the small comforts, the shared laughter, the fleeting brush of our hands, the quiet understanding in his eyes. I knew, even then, that this bond could not remain untouched. It was a spark, subtle and dangerous, waiting to ignite. And in a town that thrived on whispers and judgment, I realized that our connection would not remain private for long. As the afternoon waned, Jack packed his things slowly, Lily in tow. I followed them to the door, my heart thrumming with a mixture of longing and fear. He paused, looking down at me with the same steady gaze that had unsettled me before. "We'll continue tomorrow," he said gently. "If you're willing." I nodded, words caught in my throat. Outside, the sun reflected off puddles, shimmering like fractured gold. And somewhere in the distance, I could feel the weight of the town pressing in, ready to challenge, to question, to condemn. But none of it mattered, not while Jack's presence lingered in my mind, in my heart, in the quiet tension that refused to be ignored. As I watched him walk away with Lily, the quiet click of his boots against the cobblestones echoing, I felt a pull deep in my chest, a dangerous, thrilling pull I could not resist. And in that moment, I knew with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified me. Whatever was beginning between us, it would not be simple, safe, or ordinary. A town full of opinions could try to contain it, to twist it into gossip, but some things, some sparks, were too alive to extinguish. And ours had just begun to burn. The morning fog lingered over Willow Creek like a thin veil, softening the edges of the town I thought I knew. The streets shimmered with dew, and the familiar scent of wet earth and fresh bread drifted from the bakery. But the world outside felt distant, muted, as if time had slowed to match the rhythm of my own tangled heart. I clutched the strap of my bag, feeling the weight of the decision I had avoided for weeks. To leave, or to stay. To pursue my dreams in the city, or remain bound by obligations to my family and to the town that had raised me. Jack was already at the bakery, perched in his usual corner, his posture calm yet taut with quiet awareness. Lily sat at the table sketching, humming a tune I had begun to recognize. I hesitated at the threshold, words caught in my throat, but his gaze found mine and held it. There was no judgment in his eyes, only steady, grounding presence. A presence that both comforted and unnerved me. I need your advice," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I can't decide." Jack's expression softened. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his hands loosely clasped. "Emily," he began, "I can't make this choice for you. Nobody can. Life doesn't offer neat answers, only the courage to act and the wisdom to live with what comes next." His eyes, deep and steady, bore into mine with an intensity that made my chest ache. "Tell me, if you set aside everyone else's expectations, what would you want?" The question hit me like a jolt of electricity. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the quiet weight of truth settle over me. All the fear, guilt, and uncertainty I had carried for weeks, the fear of leaving my family, the guilt of wanting something more, condensed into a single, undeniable realization. I wanted to leave. I wanted to chase the life I had dreamed of before circumstances had tethered me. But the thought of leaving Jack, the quiet presence that had become an anchor, that subtle, unspoken connection threading between us, tightened my chest with longing. Every time our hands brushed, every glance, every shared silence had carried a current I had tried to ignore. Yet now, faced with the finality of my choice, I felt it inescapably. Jack watched me quietly, his hand brushing the rim of his coffee mug, his eyes unblinking. "It will hurt," he said softly. "Leaving isn't betrayal, Emily. It's growth. And sometimes growth demands pain." The words were both relief and torment. Relief, because they allowed me to name what I wanted without shame. Torment, because they reminded me of the pull between us, of the spark that had been building quietly beneath our conversations, beneath our laughter, beneath every careful glance. Lily looked up from her sketches, unaware of the storm of emotion in the air. She waved at me, innocent and luminous, and I realized that part of my hesitation was tied not only to my ambitions but to the delicate rhythm of Jack's life, the balance he had maintained, the boundaries he had carefully drawn. I think I need to go," I whispered, more to myself than to him. Jack leaned back slightly, his gaze softening, but there was an unmistakable pull in the way he studied me, as though trying to memorize every expression before I stepped away. "Then go," he said quietly. "And take with you the knowledge that you are stronger than you think. That you are capable of courage, even in the moments that terrify you." We sat in silence for a few minutes, the kind of silence that thrums with unspoken understanding. The world outside continued, indifferent to the quiet revolution that had occurred in the corner of the bakery. Rain had returned, a soft drizzle tapping against the window, a mirror of the uncertainty in my chest. I stood, gathering my bag, my heart pounding with a mixture of relief and dread. Jack stood as well, his presence filling the small space, a quiet gravity I could not evade. For a moment, our hands brushed as I passed him, brief and electric, and I felt the pull between us tighten, a current impossible to name. "Emily," he said softly, his voice catching slightly, almost betraying the restraint he had maintained, "whatever path you choose, know that you carry the strength to walk it alone, but also the right to lean on someone who cares. Even if it's just a moment." My throat tightened, and I nodded, words lost in the tide of emotion. Outside, the town was alive with movement, yet it felt removed from this moment, this pause in the universe where decisions and desire collided. I stepped into the drizzle, feeling the wetness on my hair and the chill on my skin, but the warmth of Jack's presence lingered like a ghost at my shoulder. The train station loomed ahead, small and familiar, yet monumental in significance. Each step toward it echoed with the weight of my decision, the uncertainty of the future and the dangerous, thrilling pull I felt toward the man I had come to rely on more than I had dared to admit. The small town had its eyes everywhere, its gossip ready to pounce, yet none of it mattered. Not now. Not when the choice was mine, and the spark between us had grown too vivid to ignore. As I boarded the train, I caught a final glimpse of Jack, standing on the platform with Lily at his side. His expression was calm, steady, but the subtle tightening of his jaw, the faint tension in his shoulders, betrayed more than words ever could. He was letting me go, giving me permission to leave, yet the quiet ache in his eyes mirrored my own. The train lurched forward, and I pressed my forehead against the glass, watching the town shrink into a patchwork of rooftops, streets, and puddles reflecting the muted sunlight. Jack's figure remained etched in my mind, a grounding force I could neither resist nor forget. I realized that life's choices were never simple. They were painful, layered with longing and regret, yet charged with the potential for growth and transformation. And in that moment, I knew with a clarity that terrified me, leaving Willow Creek, and Jack, did not mean abandoning the connection we had formed. It had ignited a spark, subtle yet unyielding, one that would follow me, haunt me, and shape every choice I made. And somewhere deep inside, I understood that when I returned, nothing, neither the town nor the years between us, would remain the same. The rain continued to fall as the train rolled forward, a soft, persistent reminder that life moved on, whether I was ready or not. My reflection in the glass blurred with the streaks of water, a double image of who I was and who I could become. And beneath it all, the memory of Jack, his eyes, his words, the quiet gravity of his presence, remained, tethering me to something larger than myself, something dangerous, exhilarating, and utterly impossible to name. The train station was quiet, unusually so, the kind of stillness that presses against your chest and magnifies every sound. The platform glistened with leftover rain, and the metal rails reflected the pale morning sun like thin ribbons of silver. I clutched my back tightly, my knuckles whitening, and tried to steady my racing heart. Each step toward the train felt like stepping into a different world, one where the safety of Willow Creek was slipping farther away with every movement. Jack was already there, standing near the edge of the platform with Lily clinging to his side. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, yet the tension in the line of his shoulders betrayed the careful restraint he was forcing himself to maintain. I wanted to run to him, to stay anchored in the warmth of his presence, but the years of caution, judgment, and societal expectation weighed on me like chains. "Emily," he said softly, his voice cutting through the quiet like a gentle command. I stopped in my tracks. That single word carried a gravity I could not resist, it wrapped around me, tethering me to this small-town man who had become far more than a guide. "Thank you," I whispered, words trembling, barely audible above the hum of the train approaching. "For everything. I couldn't have made this decision without you." Jack's eyes softened, though a subtle shadow passed over them, a flicker of something I could not yet name. "Emily," he said, stepping closer, his hand hovering in that careful space between reassurance and intimacy, "whatever happens, know this, you carry more strength than you realize. And courage, even when it hurts, even when it terrifies you." My throat tightened, and for a moment, the bustling station, the murmurs of distant travelers, the click of approaching wheels, all of it faded. There was only him, steady and grounding, and the dangerous pull threading through the air between us. His gaze lingered on mine, unwavering, and I felt the familiar current spark in my chest, like static before a storm. I glanced at Lily, who looked up innocently, tilting her head as if sensing the weight of the moment. The child's presence was a reminder, a tether to reality, yet it could not contain the swelling tide of unspoken emotion building around us. I wanted to reach for Jack's hand, to hold on to the certainty of him, yet I hesitated. The train groaned as it slowed to a halt, the metallic screech echoing through the morning air. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching Jack step aside, Lily in his arms, his figure framed by the golden sunlight reflecting off wet rails. The spark between us felt like fire held under glass, dangerous and thrilling, waiting to ignite. "You're really leaving, aren't you?" he asked softly, though his voice carried more than mere curiosity, it carried regret, longing, a subtle ache I could feel in my bones. I nodded, unable to speak. The words I wanted to say, the confessions, the yearning, the half-formed desires, remained lodged in my throat, stifled by fear, propriety, and the unspoken boundaries we both understood. "Then go," he said finally, his lips pressing into a thin, almost imperceptible line. "Go and take everything you need. And remember, this town, this life, this connection, it doesn't end because distance grows. It endures in ways you may not yet understand." I swallowed, the knot in my chest tightening. Slowly, I stepped toward the train door, every movement deliberate, every heartbeat screaming in protest. As the conductor called for departure, I allowed my reflection to blur against the streaked glass, a double image of who I was leaving behind and who I was becoming. Jack's hand brushed against mine for a fraction of a second, fleeting, electric, impossible to forget. It was neither claim nor possession, yet it tethered me to him more firmly than words could. A spark had passed between us, silent but undeniable, and I knew it would linger long after the train pulled away. The train lurched forward. I pressed my forehead against the glass once more, watching Willow Creek shrink into a mosaic of rooftops, puddles, and cobblestone streets. Jack remained on the platform, a solitary figure holding a child, framed by the soft morning light, an anchor I had never known I needed. My chest ached with longing, but also with recognition. Some bonds, once forged, refused to break. The train gained speed, carrying me toward the uncertainty of the city, toward ambition and possibility, yet I could not erase the image of Jack from my mind. The warmth of his gaze, the quiet authority in his voice, the subtle protective pull, it followed me like a shadow, constant, impossible to ignore. And in that moment, I understood something crucial: love, guidance, and longing do not adhere to rules, age, or circumstance. They arrive unexpectedly, uninvited, and demand to be acknowledged. The connection between Jack and me was no longer a question, it was a force, quiet but potent, threading through my thoughts, my heart, and my decisions. Somewhere in the middle of the train's rhythm, as the city approached and the landscape blurred into unfamiliar streets, I realized with a jolt that leaving Willow Creek had not severed what had begun between us. The spark remained, subtle but insistent, a quiet promise of something dangerous, thrilling, and unforgettable. I closed my eyes, letting the train sway beneath me, imagining his hand brushing against mine once more, imagining Lily's innocent smile, imagining the moments we had shared in that corner of the bakery. My heart thudded with anticipation and fear. I did not know what awaited me in the city, or if I would ever return, yet I knew one thing with certainty: the bond between us had shifted everything. The whistle of the train pierced the morning air, and I pressed my lips to the glass, whispering a silent vow to the man who had changed my life without touching it fully. "I'll come back," I breathed, unsure if he could hear, unsure if I meant it more for him or for myself. And somewhere in the distance, I felt it, the unspoken echo of his presence, steady and unwavering, carrying a quiet promise that would endure, that would wait, that would not be forgotten. Willow Creek could talk, the town could judge, but it could not erase the spark between us. Not now. Not ever. The city was a blur of motion, noise, and light, so different from Willow Creek, yet no less intimidating. I walked through crowded streets, my bag heavy on my shoulder, my thoughts heavier still. Every step reminded me of the morning I had left the small town behind, of the rain-soaked streets, the bakery's warm light, and the man who had rooted himself into my heart without warning. Jack. I had promised myself I would focus on my dreams, my future, my ambitions. And yet, even in the hum of the city, his words echoed, steady and unyielding: sometimes strength is knowing when to lean on someone, even if just for guidance. I smiled faintly, despite myself. That quiet wisdom had carried me farther than I could have imagined, guiding me through uncertainty like a lighthouse through fog. I sat in a small cafe near my new apartment, sketchbook open, fingers tracing lines on paper. The city buzzed around me, strangers brushing past, cars honking, life pressing forward relentlessly. And yet, in that chaos, my mind returned to Jack, the quiet authority of his presence, the gentle strength in his gaze, the moments of shared laughter and tension that had left a mark I could not erase. I thought of Lily, of her innocent curiosity, of how she had drawn him without realizing it. I thought of the bakery, the warmth of sunlight filtering through dusty windows, the scent of coffee and bread lingering like a memory. That little corner of Willow Creek had changed me, shaped me, and even across miles, its influence was undeniable. The decision I had made, to leave, had not been easy. It had demanded courage, self-reflection, and the willingness to face the unknown. But the act of leaving did not sever the connection I had forged. Instead, it gave it depth. Distance became a lens through which I could see the value of his guidance, the intensity of what we had shared, and the spark that had begun quietly in the rain. One evening, weeks later, a letter arrived. The handwriting was familiar, careful, deliberate, and unmistakably his. I unfolded the paper, heart racing, and read his words, "Emily, the world is vast and full of possibilities, yet strength is not measured by distance or separation. Carry what you have learned here, courage, clarity, and heart. And remember, some bonds, once forged, endure despite time and space." Jack. Tears pricked my eyes. It was advice, yes, but it was more than that. It was a tether, a promise, a subtle acknowledgement of the connection that had grown quietly, dangerously, beautifully between us. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Guidance could be as intimate as touch, as transformative as love, and as enduring as memory. The weeks passed, the city settling into a rhythm I had only begun to understand. Yet Jack's presence haunted me in ways that were both comforting and painful. I realized that what had begun in a small bakery, in the soft drizzle of a Willow Creek morning, was far larger than either of us had anticipated. It was a spark, a lesson, a pull that would continue to shape my choices, my courage, and my heart. One rainy evening, I found myself sketching again, this time of the bakery and the small corner where he had Saturday. My hands traced the outline of his posture, the tilt of his head, the quiet weight of his gaze. The city blurred around me, a cacophony of light and sound, yet in my mind, I was back there, half outside in the drizzle, half inside in warmth, tethered to a man who had taught me more than words could capture. I paused, pen hovering above paper, and whispered to myself, almost as a prayer, "I'll return." Not just to the town, not just to the bakery, but to him, to the quiet strength and subtle danger of the bond we shared. I did not know when, or under what circumstances, but I knew the connection endured. It was not fleeting. It was not fragile. It was a force, a lesson, a spark that had begun in the rain and refused to die. In that moment, I understood the legacy of advice, not the practical kind that guides careers or life choices, but the kind that shapes hearts, challenges fears, and transforms lives in ways you cannot predict. Jack had given me that. His guidance, his presence, his quiet insistence that I look inward for courage, these were gifts I would carry forever, across cities, across miles, across time. Weeks turned into months. I returned letters to him, not as formalities, but as glimpses of my progress, my struggles, my triumphs. Each response held warmth, subtle affection, and the steady undercurrent of a bond that refused to conform to the rules of age, distance, or societal expectation. There was longing, yes, but also wisdom, care, and a patient understanding that our connection was both dangerous and enduring. And then, one crisp morning, I boarded a train back to Willow Creek. My hands trembled slightly as I held my bag, my heart racing with anticipation and fear. Would it be the same? Would he be waiting, the same steady presence I had come to rely on? As the train rolled into the small station, I saw him immediately, Jack, standing with Lily at his side, the faint light of dawn catching the edges of his hair, the curve of his jaw, the quiet intensity in his eyes. My chest tightened. Time and distance had not diminished the pull between us. If anything, it had deepened it. He smiled softly as our eyes met, a small, knowing smile that acknowledged the months apart, the growth, the courage, and the enduring spark that neither of us had fully named. And in that moment, I realized that the legacy of his advice was more than guidance, it was the beginning of something lasting, something dangerous, something beautiful. We did not speak immediately. Words were unnecessary. The pull between us, quiet yet potent, said everything. It was in the brush of our hands, the shared glance, the subtle recognition of hearts forever changed by connection, guidance, and courage. I exhaled slowly, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the rising sun and everything to do with the man before me. The bakery, the rain, the small town, the whispers, they all faded into insignificance. What mattered was this: the spark had endured, and now, I could finally step into it without fear. Some things, I realized, were meant to guide us, to teach us, and to ignite us in ways we could not anticipate. Jack's words, his presence, and the quiet gravity of his gaze had become part of me, shaping who I was and who I could be. And standing there, at the station, I knew with certainty that this connection, this spark, was the beginning of a story that neither time, distance, nor circumstance could extinguish. The rain returned softly that morning, pattering against the roof of the station, a gentle reminder of beginnings and endings, of guidance and longing, of love that is patient, subtle, and enduring. And I stepped forward, ready to embrace both the lessons and the danger, the advice and the love, the past and the promise of a future that had begun quietly, months ago, in a rain-soaked bakery in Willow Creek.